all about, you know, very much about the body. It's all about body awareness stuff. But it's this, in this sense that through the method, they actually feel like whole people. It's really interesting. I hope he shares. I mean, he will share it because he's a very generous guy, and he'll write papers from it so that you can read it. But that's what really struck me was the difference between when you interact with other health professionals, and I put myself in there too. You know, as a physio, we've all had to specialise in a little thing. You know, like in the physio world, there's people who specialise in knees and shoulders. So it's not even like you can go to physio and have your whole musculoskeletal system attended to. And of course in medicine it's even worse. You know, now there's, you know, you can't just go to an ear, nose and throat surgeon for ear, nose and throat. You've got to go to one who, you know, looks at this part of the larynx and one part who looks at these little tubes. You know, like we are so specialised. And what really struck me was what all of these informants were saying in these interviews, that they were kind of seamlessly whole. They were talking about, in the same kind of sentence, they'd talk about their emotional state, their cognitive state and their physical state in the same sentence, because for them it was all part of the same thing. And so because he was looking at Feldenkrais from a health perspective, that's what really struck me, is that that's what makes us so different. Now, I know there's other modalities that do that, but we recognise the whole person, like actually explicitly. Like we talk to and work with all of those things. And I'm not saying we're psychologists, I'm not saying we're psychiatrists and this, that and the other, but we don't deny any of those things. We don't, and again, it doesn't mean to say that we don't work in teams and we refer on, but that's what really struck me, what these people were saying about their lives. And some of you have been commenting to me about the sort of, you know, in a way, infiltration of some of the thinking and ways of being that you do in here that can infiltrate, as it were, the rest of your life. Well, that's exactly what these long-term students were talking about. That this was not just something that happened in the room, it was something that they could carry with them. And it wasn't an acquired thing, it was like getting rid of a whole lot of shit. Do you know what I mean? It was just like shedding shit. And of course, I'm putting my interpretation on it. And Cliff was very clever at not, you know, at gathering their things and sort of putting them together. But it's great, Jenny. We're in for a treat. Really good, really good. And he's a very, very smart dude. Cliff, he was a writer here anyway before he did Feldenkrais, so it's going to be great. He's very scholarly. My God. Yin Zarin. Anyway, so that's very validating. And the reason he's doing it is he wants to put those voices out there so that practitioners can hear those voices, so that we understand what we're doing. Now, interestingly, the other thing that he noted in his sort of as limitations, but I don't think it's a limitation, is that they had all had a lot of FI and ATM. And when he was interviewing them about this, hi Anastasia, when he was interviewing them, what he noticed was that they were almost always referencing to the ATM experiences. It's not to say that FI is not really important, but just in case you're under any conceit that FI is the main game, in these interviews, he was quite shocked, actually. You know, and he didn't say shocked because it's not a scholarly word, but he was surprised that they attribute all of these, you know, and words like self-efficacy and feeling enabled and empowered and whole and all those sorts of things, they were primarily attributing to the ATM experience. So just FYI, do you feel like FI is the main game or ATM? No, I think we've banged that to start with, yeah. 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 ATM. Yeah, so the segment with Julie, yeah, I'll just repeat that for the tape, yeah. Yeah, so anyway, and it's probably me needing to say that for my generation rather than me saying that for your generation of practitioners. I don't know, what was your main game in your sort of mindset, Jen? Yeah.
It's a community attitude that ATM's kind of the sort of poor relation in a way, that we don't give it a much credence in terms of its capacity to empower people to be responsible for their own
Yep.
change and well-being.
Yeah.
We haven't in the past given enough credibility to seeing it as something that needs skill development specifically, as we do with FI.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting.
that is changing, and it's good to see that we understand the importance of teaching and facilitating and felicitating to engage other people in the process.
Yeah, and that the self-efficacy stuff, I think, for me is the big thing about ATM. Yeah. Julia. Yeah, and we will. Yeah, and that's something, that us as a training community have really talked about. And Julie's been experimenting with Jenny and CS1 about maintaining the momentum around ATM and keeping, obviously it can't have primacy in the second 2 years because there's a lot of FI stuff to get through, but still having a very strong thread and presence, an opportunity to develop. So we will absolutely follow that. Yeah. That's why it's always an experiment.
No, I'm thinking what happened to me when I'm doing ATM or when I give an ATM or facilitate a space.
Yeah.
It's actually coming from you, the power of change, anything coming from you.
Yeah.
When you go to have an FI, you became more passive and it's the other person. I mean, if you are receptive, you probably have that transformation together, which is not only who is giving, it's both of you. But if you haven't got a receptive person giving, you probably don't discover much. And if I think about what Moshe was doing on himself, he was doing ATMs and FIs, whatever, but discovering from the inside how to get rid of the pain, how to get away from this, and then he passed it on. So for me, it's always going back to the source, what it's coming from. He was discovering himself by himself. So that's what I really like, the power of ATMs, power or the discovery.
It's true. I mean, NFIs are great for a bit of a kickstart and a bit of a mirror. They're another mirror. Someone else is, giving you some really, hopefully, targeted feedback that you can put into your system. But it's a bit like meditation. It's the post-meditation that's an important bit. It's what you do after, right? It's what you take from the lesson afterwards, which then is your responsibility. Now, if you offer an FI like it's a treatment, that's the end of it. So at the end of the treatment, I feel better. Good, I've had a treatment. Excellent. Now I'm going to, whatever. However, if you offered it as a lesson, I'm going to give you a few things to think about or sense or feel or do. And then it's the post-lesson that the lesson continues. If you have that mindset as a practitioner, then you can get a bit of a flavour of the ATM. But I agree with you. The ATM is just so your process. It's your process. It's your mat. It's your process. So anything that you gain is yours. It's fantastic. Yeah. Anyway, I'm a fan. And then the other thing that I got from the thesis, which some of you have been asking me about, so I thought we'd just put out into the whole room, is this, and I've made notes all over the thesis for us to discuss on Fridays, this paradox between we are raising people's awareness, right? So we're becoming more aware of it. And in the interviews, people are talking about that a lot. They're more aware of things and they make more conscious choices. However, what they notice in their life changing seems to change in an unconscious way. And a few of you have been asking me these questions in the breaks. That's why I'm bringing it up now. Now, I think that's a really fascinating paradox because, yes, we're peddling awareness and, yes, we do experience these changes without actually knowing. So what are we becoming aware of? Not necessarily absolute specifics. And I don't have an answer for this, and this is what, I'm going to put better minds than mine to this because it's a really interesting idea. So the question people have been asking me in the breaks have been, when, for our behaviour to change, does it have to be conscious? Is it a conscious change? And the answer is sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. So my body continued to change during and after my training in ways that I had no idea about. I had no goals for it. I had no awareness of it. But I stand differently on my legs now than I used to. I mean, I was it wouldn't look like it now because you can see my old skeleton coming out. But I was a very pigeon-toed, knock-kneed child. I had corrective stuff, I vaguely remember. so I had quite structural habits. You know, if you think about bones as calcified behaviour, I had quite structural things happening from birth, clearly. And I'm not particularly knock-kneed anymore. And I didn't even know that. I remember, probably I've told you this story. I was at one of our colleagues' places in Sydney for a Feldenkrais meeting. And I said, and someone said something about, "Oh, you've got nice legs, Susan." I said, "Yeah, you know, apart from the knock knees." This is Chris Lambert, who's a very good practitioner. And she said, "You haven't got knock knees, Susan." I went, "You have?" "Yeah, like I have. I've had, not surgery, but, you know, I've had." And I don't actually particularly anymore. I mean, if you really look, you can see some, you know, vague sort of remnants of it, but I actually don't. Now that, from my sort of physio kind of thing, that stuff wouldn't normally change. So I'm very happy to attribute that to the years of Feldenkrais. But I had no goals about that, right? I wasn't conscious of changing. I mean, I vaguely knew that I'd take weight differently on my feet, and when I'm really tired, the old stuff kind of pops in, but I don't consciously, it wasn't a conscious change. Does that make sense? Whereas other things are quite conscious, you know, they bubbled up to be quite conscious. And you know, more about sort of more overt behaviours about the way I act in the world, maybe not so much the somatic stuff as more the sort of mental and emotional stuff, where I do make conscious choices because of awareness. And I stop myself and go, that's your habit. Pause. Try something different. So does that make sense to people? So this awareness thing is interesting. And it's interesting also because the literature is very divided on whether awareness is a good thing or not. Because awareness can tip into, you know, hypervigilance. And so, you know, in our studies, we've been looking for body awareness scales, and most of them are looking at body awareness as a pathology, like with dysmorphias, you know, body dysmorphias and hypervigilance. So these words, what they mean, so people who have a lot of chronic pain become hyper aware of parts of their body, and that's not a good thing. They're hypervigilant around their back or their neck or something like that. So you could say that their body awareness is heightened. Is it useful? Not in any way. It's a problem. It's an obsession. And then the dysmorphias is a hyper awareness of body, you know, like for people who've got eating disorders and those sorts of things. So that's when body awareness can tip into this more obsessive quality, but they can't get away from being aware of certain aspects. Delusional. Yeah, and it has an obsessive quality. And so we know that everything that gets into that's a habit, therefore. Right? So therefore what we're saying is this awareness stuff. And some of my friends who, you know, is our awareness is so tiring. Well, we're not saying you have to walk around being aware all the time. I'm so aware. You know, like that's just pretentious. It's the ability to use awareness judiciously, you know, the ability to use awareness when it serves you well. That's, I think, what we're after. And also recognising that a lot of this shit happens underground. And in a way, you don't have to worry about it because it's going to happen. You just have to lie on the floor and pay attention. You don't have to necessarily understand it. So the why I'm saying that is to get back to felicitating ATMs is that there will be aspects of ATM that you don't understand. That they are complex. They can be viewed as very complex. They can be viewed as very simple. And I keep saying to you, the ATMs work even if you put a tape on. They don't work as well, but they still work with just a disembodied voice. So if that helps you to feel more comfortable, that's a good thing, because the lessons in themselves have a lot of the magic. Yeah, I think that's enough. Any other cues? Yeah. More A's.
I think what we're becoming aware of is that really lived experience, that small changes can give us options to improve something.
Yeah.
And that's a kind of a general lesson that we learn at quite an unconscious level, so that instead of finding ourselves stuck and frustrated, we automatically, intuitively know that we could try something else.
Yeah.
And that starts to change our behaviour in the world, that we start to look for do I just need to adjust my weight or move a little differently, or do I need to think a little differently, or do I need to find a different way of saying what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that it's not being aware of everything. It's training our capacity to notice small differences, and whether a small difference gives us the change that we want, so that we don't kind of overshoot when we correct or adjust.
Yeah. And that can be an unconscious and a conscious.
Yeah.
So that's really...
Yeah, the more we do it, the more habitual and unconscious it becomes.
Yeah. And that's, interestingly, again, for me, interestingly, in these interviews, it came out, because I tend to think that these sort of more integrated aspects of Feldenkrais come out more in the training programs. So it's really interesting for me to hear that these really profound insights were coming out of suburban students, as it were, because of the, obviously the quality of the practitioners as well, but the method itself. So it's, it's very interesting that then they talk about all these things about choice. They talk about choice a lot, about what you're saying about this becoming, I think it's, when I tease my mindfulness friends at home, it's about mindfulness for what? And what they were very clear about, this is awareness for something. It's awareness for something. That's why it's got the I can and I do it words, the functional words. And they were talking about it in relation to functioning better in the world, not just being aware for the sake of awareness, but using the awareness for a function. So that's, I think, what we have to offer. They played tennis. Well, one was an 83-year-old. I'm really enjoying tennis again. That sort of thing. I feel 83 playing tennis and finding a new kind of enjoyment in playing tennis. It's fantastic.
The program on attention was last night.
Oh, yeah. Was it last night? Of course, Tuesday. Was it any good? It wasn't any good because I wasn't on it.
It was interesting without you.
Oh, right, was it?
But it would have been better with you.
Yeah. Correct.
But what was interesting in terms of they had a lot of, there was a brain surgeon, a flight, is the people who do the flight,
the
air traffic controller, thank you. And they also had a neuro
psychologist,
thank you. See, I'm really good with the words. And they also had a lot of people with ADHD.
Yeah.
And a young woman who was also a fantastic violinist. And they talked about how attention, how they had to break up and control their attention. And partly it was about offering distractions. For those who are the experts at attention, they had really sophisticated ways of managing how they attended to things and then how they did not attend to things.
Yeah.
So they had to give themselves breaks. Whereas the ADHD people had to learn how to manage the distractions so they could attend to things.
Yeah.
It was really, that was what was really interesting.
Yeah.
And it became about being, it was somewhere in there, it's about being aware of when you are distracted and of being aware of when you need to attend.
Yes.
And that was really interesting.
Yeah, that's great. Well, maybe jump on SBS, whatever their iView version is on SBS, and have a little looky. We'll talk about attention when we talk about some neuroscience-y things, probably that will come up towards the end of the week, because it's kind of one of the foundations of cognition, the ability to attend. And I think I've said to you many times that a couple of the women in the Adelaide training who are speechies, who work with people with head injury, they use the method for attention training, full stop. Like, not that the speech pathologists, they couldn't give a shit about the body, actually. Now they can because they've fallen in love with it. But they actually did it because of the way that it gives us a really clear operational way to train attention. In a way that helps people with head injury, because they're mostly young guys who are fitters and turners. They don't want to do book stuff to train attention. They don't want to do tabletop stuff, but they will do stuff that's more physical. And that was really Feldenkrais's thing. The body is the vehicle, because people identify with the body more easily as a vehicle for learning than the mind fuck stuff, you know, with the sort of Milton Erickson stuff, which is the same stuff but only using the mind, as it were. So that's really, I'm glad they did it. So what they must have cut, what they told me, they wouldn't have time for anything with the stroke stuff, where attention is really, can be really weird. But maybe had a bit of stroke, yeah.
Because the focus was on the ADHD.
Yeah, I figured that would be what would happen. Just taking over the world. Anyone with autism? Because that's an, you know.
No, it was all of the people had ADHD.
Oh, right.
In terms of the opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
So that was the entire focus.
Right, yeah, interesting. Yeah. We've got a lot to offer in terms of training attention, I think. You know, I think it's something that we haven't pursued. So some of you hopefully will, and is what we offer. Okay, so let's, you've all gone to your mat. I mean, are you telling me something? Gee, what could it be? I want to sleep. All right, we're still doing ATM then. Let's do it.